We have more about how the implementation of the free trade agreements with Korea, Colombia, and Panama will affect the U.S. beef industry in this week's Market Watch. And joining me in the studio is Joe Sheely, Communications Director for the U.S. Meat Export Federation, and Brett Stewart, Market Analyst with CattleFax. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us, Kevin.
Well, first of all, just begin by telling us, what do these free trade agreements mean, not only in terms of beef exports, but specifically in terms of U.S. beef producers? Joe?
Well, Korea is a tremendous market, both in the volume that we move to Korea and the very high premiums that we derive from that market. It's a very high value market. We've done extremely well there over the past couple of years. This year we're up more than 50% in Korea, and so it's one of our really premier markets. And so eliminating that 40% duty that they impose on beef imports. We're not going to eliminate it as quickly as we'd like. It'll be phased down over 15 years, but eliminating that duty is going to make our product so much more accessible to a wider range of consumers there that we'll be able to grow that market quite a lot faster.
That's great. What would you say, Brett?
Well, I'd just say, if you look at U.S. beef export growth and how successful it's been over the years, the key drivers are market access, incomes, and population. And a lot of people get hung up on currencies and prices, but historical analysis will show you that's where the growth is. Where we have access, we compete very well. And you can look back at the Japan agreements and how we build into that market. And as Joe said, 40% duty is very punitive. And what it is, it's really a tax on the Korean consumers.
Sure.
And so to be able to relieve that tax on their consumers holds great potential for us.
We talk a lot about Korea and Asia in general, but also part of the free trade agreements, obviously, with Colombia and Panama. Tell us what it means in terms of those markets.
In terms of Colombia, a lot of people don't get excited about shipping beef to Colombia, but you think about it, Colombia has 45 million people. That's roughly the population of South Korea. And their per capita income is about $9,500 on a purchasing power parity basis. That's where Korea was in 1992. And so these free trade agreements, it's going to be a 15-year phase out on duties and quotas. But you look at this, what we're really doing, we're plowing ground for future generations. And there was a time in 1992 we may not have thought too much about South Korea. But looking down the road at Colombia, we have absolutely, enormous potential to ship beef to that country.
Joe, anything else?
I would agree. In a lot of Latin American countries, there's a growing middle class that are looking for higher quality meats. And you have a maturing of the retail and food service sectors down there. You have more modern supermarkets, more modern restaurants, and those are the settings where we can really differentiate our high quality product. And so these two countries have lagged behind the rest of the region a little bit because of the duties we face there, about 30% in Panama and as high as 80% in Colombia. And yet we have made some inroads in both of these markets. So far this year we're at about $2.5 million worth in each of those markets. But we'll grow them very quickly once we're able to phase those duties down. In fact, we had a product showcase in Panama City recently in preparation for having wider market access, and we had about 75 buyers participate, and they weren't all from Panama and Colombia, but that was a major part of the showcase. And so there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest in higher quality products, and some of their other providers, the countries in South America that export beef, aren't necessarily the most reliable suppliers, and so they're looking for some alternatives.
Now, there are some people, I will tell you, and you know this as well, that believe that FTA agreements like this undermine domestic industries. And so they're not sure, and I suspect that's part of the reason why we've seen this so slow in terms of getting any passage. What would you say to those folks who believe that these kind of agreements will actually undermine U.S.-based industries as opposed to helping them?
I think you got to look at it from the standpoint of what sector we're in. And I know there's a lot of sensitivity about trade, the economy's in tough shape. But one thing is very clear to me is that U.S. agriculture is incredibly competitive. If there's one industry that we can compete globally in, it's agriculture. U.S. farmers and ranchers produce the safest, most affordable food on the planet. We see that in all these markets. And so this is a big win for U.S. farmers and ranchers. We just simply don't lose on free trade agreements based on our competitive nature.
Anything else that people should keep in mind, Joe?
Well, I think sometimes people have a tendency to think of exports as generally having a negative impact on the domestic supply, and I would say that's quite the opposite. When our farmers and ranchers are able to capitalize on the foreign markets, that contributes to their profitability. It keeps more of them in business, and it keeps more of them wanting to grow their operations. If you're not able to capitalize on those premiums that those foreign markets offer, you're just not going to have the kind of growth in American agriculture that you would otherwise have. And that's really what ensures the security and the reliability of our domestic food supply too.
I think that's a great point to keep in mind. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your perspective, and hope to have you back when we hopefully get these things finally passed.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
For more information on the free trade agreements and international beef trade, visit our website at cattlemantocattleman.org.